We're sawing bones and de-oiling snakes in a show all about quackery. Joining me on Queasy Street are the miraculous and rejuvenating Claudia Winkleman. Guaranteed to take years off your life, it's Victoria Coren Mitchell. Good for anything that ails you, it's Stephen K. Amos. Alan Davis. And their buzzers don't sound well at all. Claudia goes... Achoo! Wow. Hello. Victoria goes...
Oh! Literally dying.
Stephen goes...
My dad's car.
And Alan goes... Anybody else feel the need for a mop? I've given you all some quack medicines. I would like you to persuade me to buy them. So we're going to start with Stephen. Oh. What is your quack medicine?
It's a jar of Princess Lotus Blossom's Vital Spark.
Marvellous. And what do you suppose it does?
The lotus blossoms, of course, one of the most famous flowering flowers.
I love a flowering flower.
From Japan.
Yes.
Obviously, it gives you vital sparks, energy.
Right.
Basically, a modern-day superhero supplement.
Right.
Yeah, there is a wave of superhero films at the moment. We should all embrace those.
Right.
One of the biggest ones for me last year was, of course, Black Panther. The Black Panther gets his superpowers by consuming a special herb.
OK.
You want to just go the whole hog and just call him Ganja Man.
These were actually sold at the World Fair in 1904 by somebody pretending to be Princess Lotus Blossom, and she was trying to give men a vital spark. What might be the idea behind the pill that men might want?
Like a prompt to action.
Yes, exactly that. She was actually a woman called Violet McNeil. She was from the Midwest, and she had nothing to do with being a princess, but she claimed to be Chinese. And does anybody know why she could claim to be Chinese and nobody would know? She's put on a bit of what they used to call yellow face. I know. That's what it was called. It was called yellow face. It was because the Americans had banned all Chinese people in 1882, so people didn't know what a Chinese person looked like.
They just banned them?
They just banned them. The Chinese Exclusion Act. It's a pretty clear name for an act, isn't it? We just got rid of them.
On what grounds?
Well, that there were too many of them working, and what they wanted to do was to have jobs for you know, Americans. They were not Chinese. And so they got rid of them. In fact, they got rid of them until 1943, when they allowed in 105.
That's extraordinary. So they didn't know she was Chinese?
No, so they didn't know she wasn't Chinese. She was this woman from the Midwest.
Hell, that's Violet. She ain't Chinese. That's Violet? Violet! What are you doing?
They're basically boiled sweets, but she told everybody that this was something that had come from a pouch in the turtle brain called the quackery.
Violet, where'd you get them pills?
There it is, the quackery. And she would say, a man who takes these pills will shout out, Pongwuki, which is, she claimed, Chinese for eureka.
So these from that era, if I take a couple, will the desk rise?
You might just come through it like that. Tunneling thing, you know, in Thunderbirds.
I suddenly really want them to work. Right, let's try another one. Alan, you've got some medicine. What have you got?
Oh, well, it's Dr. Brinkley's Formula 1020.
And what do you think's in it?
I think something drawn from an animal of some sort, of bodily fluid. And then you add it to your own self. Cheaply priced and almost odourless.
Well...
I'm describing myself there.
It was a distillation of goat glands.
Oh, for God's sake.
What? Yeah. Well, it wasn't, actually. It was just coloured water.
The temptation to fire it at the audience is almost...
I'm glad I was looking at you. I would have thought it was Stephen. He promoted this as a distillation that would cure anything from emphysema to flatulence.
What?
Which is quite a range, isn't it, of
Yes.
diseases.
So I was quite close. Cure anything, a cure-all.
Yes, but he also looked part goat, I think.
Yes, goatee.
Yes, exactly. And goats were a big thing for him because after the coloured water, he thought something more significant is needed. And he started transplanting goats' testicles into men's scrotums.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
You can't put a goat's testicle into a man's scrotum.
Well, as they discovered...
And God knows I've tried. But there's
He was the goat gland doctor, and you would select your goat, and the goat would then be castrated and the testicles inserted into the patient's scrotum.
But no, that didn't happen.
No, it did happen, and lots of people did it without checking whether he was medically qualified to do this.
Were these people, were they maybe impotent and concerned whether they could or could not have kids?
Aha!
Baby goats.
Yeah. It's better when you explain it. He went to something called Eclectical Medical College in Kansas, but he didn't actually graduate. And anyway, the college was one of homeopathy. But he became unbelievably famous as the goat gland doctor. He started his own radio station in Kansas. He became so popular that he paid for the town that he lived in to have a second post office to receive all the letters that he got. He did kill hundreds of people. And in the end, in 1939, he sued the American Medical Association. Somebody had dared to say he was a fraud, and he sued them for libel. And then when he gave evidence, it was quite clear that he was a fraud, and he was stripped of his licence. He died in poverty. Don't feel bad for him. Big fan of Hitler.
Right.
Yeah. Had a swimming pool decorated with miniature swastikas. You know, they
Wow.
Yeah, so...
Wouldn't they castrate and sheep and goats?
Yeah.
Then the testicles just drop off and shrivel up in the sack, don't they?
Actually, that's not true, because I have held a pair of ram's testicles. And...
Ram's testicles.
Yeah, they weren't attached to the ram at the time. I was making a series about the dictionary, and we were investigating the origins of the word codswallop.
Yep.
Because nobody quite knows where it comes from, and one theory was that it's related to cods, which is slang for testicles, and... you know, television being what it is, apparently I had to explain this on camera while holding a pair of ram's testicles.
So, as in cod piece?
Yeah, cods, knackers, it's a sort of common slang.
No.
Yes, and we went to a butcher's shop.
This is good.
And, no, but they're enormous.
Describe like that.
I mean...
Can I just say this is not the direction I thought this was going to go? So here's the thing, lots and lots of cures for virility, and I'm just going to pass this on as a piece of general knowledge. If you put Viagra in a vase of flowers, the flowers will stay erect for a week longer than normal. Right, Claudia, your medicine,
Yes?
what are you going to sell to us? Let's come
OK.
away, shall we, from virility.
Oh, this is excellent. Theodore Roosevelt's baldness salve.
Ah.
Yeah. It might not be your hair, it's just an area of your body where you want some more hair. Forearms, legs. Oh, cool. Check me out.
Yeah.
You use this.
Right.
I use this. Yeah, before this, I didn't have hair and down. Yeah.
Well, it was sold by something called the Skolder Institute, and it was sold as something that had been used by both Roosevelt and Houdini. As it happens, both of them had recently died just before this product came out, so they couldn't say whether it was true or not. You sent samples of your hair through the post for an individual diagnosis by Professor Skolder, and he got his diagnosis from a Dominican friar. It was rather a complicated process, but a guy called Arthur J. Cramp, who was a rather tenacious member of the American Medical Association, he sent in hairs from a fox fur coat, from a Japanese wolf dog, then a woman with extremely long, lustrous hair, and finally a piece of wrapping twine. And each time he got the same response, which was that the hair was severely undernourished and needed Dr. Skolder's cure. It's actually just Vaseline.
Yeah, but good.
Good.
But I think I did. I mean, we all want some, right?
Yes, you've sold that to us.
People have asked me whether I have experienced hair loss due to the fact that I'm wearing what is called a do-rag. I thought I'd wear it tonight
Right.
to bring attention to the great British public that that is what this is.
OK.
It's not a hat, it's not a hairnet, it's a do-rag. I get confused. People at the airport, immigration, excuse me, sir, can you take off your bonnet? And I get quite defensive. I say it's actually a do-rag.
It is a hat.
Yeah.
I mean, not not to get too existential, but...
Please do.
What is a hat?
Oh, where do we draw the line? A plastic bag?
If you put it on your head, it's a hat.
Right, Victoria,
Oh.
a cure, please.
Yes, OK, I have...
Oh, Tupperware.
Do Nothing Mitchell's Rest Cure. My
Yeah.
guess is going to be that it's just fresh air in some...
Well, it used to be known as Dr. Diet and Dr. Quiet. And actually, this guy, that's him there holding a clinic, Dr. Silas Mitchell. He's not really a quack, but sometimes good doctors come up with kind of quacky ideas.
Look at the do-rags on them three.
Said no one ever.
But what era is that?
Turn of the 20th century.
Because until the turn of the 20th century, I think the distinction between doctors and quacks was quite moot.
Oh, yeah, but this guy he's the father of neurology. But he also came up with this idea, women in particular, that it was incredibly good for them to lie down, do absolutely nothing for 6 weeks. And they were not allowed to do anything except be spoon-fed, maybe get up and go to the loo. They had to drink pint after pint of milk, and they were banned from reading and writing. So Virginia Woolf did the cure. Her doctor described it when she'd had a nervous breakdown. She writes about it in Mrs. Dalloway. Charlotte Gilman wrote The Yellow Wallpaper, which is a book about a woman going mad because of this rest cure, but it was particularly given to women, and it was thought that this would cure them of... I don't know, the hysterical idea that they wanted to work.
Or read a book.
Or read a book.
Think of all the laundry that's mounted up after 6 weeks.
But he was also a good doctor. He coined the term phantom limb syndrome. He, in fact, was the first reported case of something called Mitchell's disease.
We've all been there.
Do we know where we get the word quack from?
Ducks.
Extra point for Alan there. I think that's marvellous.
Something's going to go off.
It's quack salve. It's somebody just bragging about their ointment. There's a fantastic golden age in the United States of quackery. It's pretty much post-Andrew Jackson. He was the 7th president, and he generally believed that the common man knew more than experts. So he was the Michael Gove of his day, if you like. All but 3 states repealed all their laws regarding medicine, so people were free to just go and sell whatever they like in medicine shows. I mean, Europe had them as well. We had what we called mountebanks, who used to go and sell medicines, literally climbing up onto a bench. It's Italian for mounting a bench. Right, this next question makes me all of a quiver. Why might you invest in a vibratory chair? Oh! Perfect noise for it.
Because you're furnishing your vibratory?
Oh! I want a vibratory.
Yeah. It's a new room in sexy Cluedo. Go there, you get beaten to death by an Art Deco vibrator.
It's a good place to go if you're mixing something in a bowl.
Well, there is an entire museum in the United States called the Museum of Questionable Medical Devices. It's in a science museum in Minnesota. It was called the Battle Creek Vibratory Chair. It's from 1900. There it is there. It shook the patient violently to help waste pass through the intestines. It also cured headaches, apparently. It was installed in John Harvey Kellogg's sanatorium in Battle Creek. Kellogg, famous for...
Cornflakes.
Cornflakes, absolutely. He was an odd fellow. He believed that all sex was bad. I mean,
All
everything.
sex?
All sex, yeah. He was married for a long time, but it said it was never consummated.
They produce huge quantities of semen.
Oh, look at that now. I just shook this in my chair.
Joking aside, vibrators were used as medical equipment.
Yes.
I think in the 20s, to temper the hysteria of women when they go getting ideas, you calm them down with a vibrator. And, you know, some doctors, I think, had queues around the block. But that's again, the border, isn't it, between quackery and medicine, because it's sort of a nonsense in a way, and yet...
Well worth doing the research.
I'm not sure that isn't an urban myth. You think it is true, though?
Yes, I've been to a vibrator museum.
Where is there a vibrator museum?
In Holland. I mean, genuinely, a woman would go and see the doctor, and the doctor would perform the exercise for her. And, you know, nobody ever came out feeling worse.
You feeling better yet?
there's also, in this museum of questionable medical devices, there's a 1970s foot-operated breast-enlarging pump. It looks completely... There it is. Yeah.
Oh, is that so you can be discreet under the desk?
Do you mean to pump milk out?
No. The idea was it would make your breasts larger if you pumped at them. I think one of the most horrible ads I've ever seen for a dubious medical device is for Dr. Scott's electric hairbrush, sold in the 1890s. Look at this. Dr. Scott's electric hairbrush will not save an Indian's scalp from his enemies, but it will preserve yours from dandruff, baldness, falling hair. What I like is at the very bottom it just says, valuable book, free. It came with a compass. And the compass...
A compass?
Yes, if you passed it over the brush, it jumped and it's supposed to show that the brush was properly working. I mean, obviously, it just showed it had magnetised iron in it. And then there was a guy who was I think he was the kind of dean of gadget quacks, Albert Abrams. He invented lots of things, but one of the things he invented was the dynamizer. And he claimed he could diagnose any known disease with a single drop of a patient's blood or their handwriting or do it over the phone. A blood sample was sent to him by a member of the American Medical Association and got back a diagnosis that the patient had malaria, diabetes, cancer and syphilis. In fact, the blood had come from a rooster. Now to a different kind of quack. What am I saying here?
Oh, adorable. I mean, it's time for tea. Get all your mallard friends. I've laid out the area.
But do not bring bread.
Yes, no, bread is very bad for ducks. That's a very good point. But you mentioned mallards. Most ducks don't quack. But it is predominantly female mallards who make this particular noise. And why do you think they make it?
Is it a duck rape alarm? Because isn't that a famous thing? Consent is not big in the duck world.
No, not at all. They're nasty to each other sometimes. Yeah.
Yes, and I think the mating thing is pretty horrible. Hashtag quack quack.
They mate for life and they're in love. I believe that. I saw it on a Valentine's card.
That's swans.
Yeah.
Yes, the sex act is a forced one for ducks.
Yeah, and they chase them down and then they keep their face out the water by holding their neck up with a beak.
Very unpleasant.
And then they impose themselves upon the female. In the middle of Hampstead Heath.
It's not right. So the females give these bouts of loud, monotonous quacks, particularly during their pre-laying period. Why might they do that?
But is it because they're fertile?
It is because they're fertile, but it isn't what you might think, which is that they're looking for a mate, because they quite often will do it when the mate is right there. Weirdly, we now think it's because they're drawing the attention of any predatory mammals who might be in the area. So what they want to do is, if the predators come, they think, not going to stay here and nest, it's not safe. And so they're actually trying to attract the very thing that might have a go at them.
Gosh, that's clever, isn't it?
It's clever,
yes,
isn't it?
Yes, yes, like leaving your car doors unlocked if you go to look round a house.
Yeah, exactly that, yeah.
Exactly.
OK, I haven't thought of doing that, but that's very clever. The other possibility, of course, is that there's already a pair of ducks there and they're sending out a message saying, we've moved in, don't any other ducks come, because this is our place, so go away. But now, let's all have a go. You've all got a duck caller. There is a human sport of duck calling, so trying to get the waterfowl to come in order to be shot, and the best duck callers take part in a World Championship duck calling contest, which is in Arkansas in every Thanksgiving.
Well, why don't we all go?
I don't know.
Why aren't we there?
I know. Let's see if we're good enough. Only one woman has ever won. Rather pleasingly, she won in 1955 and 56. She was called Pat Peacock. Brilliant. The very first person who won didn't have a duck caller at all, just made the sound with their own throat. Victorian children used to make their bird callers by cutting the larynx from a recently dead goose. Yeah, and blowing through it.
Oh, thank God television was invented.
I know.
Look at what they used to do if a child had no legs. They just had to muck in.
Anyway, Anyway, in 1850, there was a 12-year-old who accidentally swallowed his goose's larynx that he was blowing through, and he started honking like a goose every time he breathed. And there was a German doctor who eventually performed a tracheotomy on him, and there's a medical paper entitled "On the Removal of a Larynx of a Goose from That of a Child." Mallards quack to check for predators and avoid becoming a sitting duck. But what would you have to do to find yourself imprisoned in Reading for 2 years?
Oh, a sort of BA in town planning or something like that.
I've actually done shows in Reading, and for a laugh, I would just go, "Good evening, it's great to be here in Reading." And I heard this woman say, "Oh, he's trying to say Reading." Well, you're here for a comedy show. I thought I was going to be imprisoned because I couldn't pronounce Reading correctly.
I was on a bus not very long ago, and I was going past a pub, and there was a sign outside. I thought it said Reading versus, and I couldn't read the bottom bit because there was somebody standing in the way, and I thought, Reading versus...
Colouring in.
Colouring in, or
Singing?
Yes. Anyway, it turned out to be football, and it was Reading versus... Who would Reading play, darling?
Another team.
Pretty much the amount of interest I paid to it. Yeah. So come on, what would you have to do?
Oscar Wilde, Reading Jail.
It is not connected to Oscar Wilde. There's a special quarantine centre there.
Is there?
In Reading.
Nits.
Yeah. No. There is the International Cocoa Quarantine Centre.
Stop.
In Reading, part of the University of Reading. There are lots of terrible diseases that chocolate can get. Frosty pod, witch's broom.
I knew they did silly courses in Reading, I knew.
Well, but these are really serious, Alan, because they can destroy up to 40% of the crop every year. And so when cocoa plants are transported from one country to another, it's very important to make sure that the diseases are not moved with them. And so chocolate plants will spend 2 years in Reading being cloned.
Relaxing.
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 Being cloned,
Hanging out.
tested, hanging out. If they're healthy after 2 years, then they can go on to their destination. But otherwise, they are kept in quarantine. But do you know why it's in Britain?
Is there some kind of per capita thing where we're the biggest chocolate consumers?
No, it's really simple. The weather's so bad that the diseases wouldn't possibly survive out.
It's one of the major perks of living here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
OK, why might you quarantine 5 million people?
Wales.
5 million people, largest quarantine in history. I'm going to help you out. I'm going to tell you 1918.
Was it the flu?
Yes, flu epidemic. The whole of Australia was quarantined in 1918. The flu epidemic, pandemic, started in the USA and in Europe, and the Australian government decided to quarantine the entire country. All ships were intercepted, all forced to moor offshore and see if any symptoms developed. The flu did eventually get through, but it wasn't anywhere near as bad as it could have been. I mean, still very bad. 40% of the country got flu, 15,000 people died. However, if you put that against the rest of the world, 50 to 100 million people died of the flu, and there were 500 million cases. And tragically, the celebrations at the end of the First World War helped to spread it, because people who'd been keeping in their houses suddenly came out to celebrate, and then the flu was passed from one person to another. Anybody know why it was called the Spanish flu? It started in the United States and probably in France as well. It's one of those weird things where the censors didn't want anybody to write about the fact that there was a flu epidemic because they thought it would cause panic. But you could write about it being in Spain, because Spain was neutral and not part of the war. So we just blamed the Spanish. Not only not fighting, but now they've given us flu, the swines.
That's a really good fact.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I like that.
Here's the thing about Australia. They even quarantine rocks. Did you know this? I love this
It's
fact.
called?
Yeah, they're called sorry rocks.
Oh.
So, lumps of Uluru or Ayers rock is sometimes taken by tourists, and then they feel really guilty about it, and they post them back to the park rangers.
No.
Yeah, they get about one a day. The largest ever returned weighed 32 kilos. Somebody has taken a 32-kilo
But also, don't you find when you're on holiday you buy stuff that's inappropriate?
Yeah.
You go, oh, a Stetson. I'm going to live in a Stetson.
Yeah.
Because I'm in Texas. And then
Yeah.
you go home and you go, why?
Yeah. But the worry is that there's a small threat of pathogens being introduced through the rocks, and so they actually put the rocks in a neutral area. Would you like to meet Vomiting Larry?
No.
Yes.
What? Have you got a thing about
I've
vomit?
just closed my eyes. You continue.
No, we're not actually going to show vomit. We're just going to talk about it a lot.
Oh, I thought somebody called Larry was just going to come.
It's going to be a volcano or some kind of weird beetle or something.
It's not a volcano. It is a humanoid simulated vomiting system developed by UK's Health and Safety Laboratory in Derbyshire by researcher Dr. Kat Mackerson Booth. And there is Kat, and there is vomiting Larry, right
Hello.
there.
Sorry.
Kat, I believe that Larry can vomit on command.
He can.
Why would you invent such a thing?
So we're looking at infection transmission, so we want to identify how far vomit spreads so that we can help clear it all back up again and prevent transmission of fluid. I kind of wish he was full there now so we could get Alan back for early.
Yes, shooting it with goat gland. Presumably, I'm going to guess it's further than we think the little pool of vomit is.
Yeah, it'd kind of fill with all the droplets and splash most of this bit of the studio.
No.
Wow.
Yeah, but you wouldn't be able to see it, so when you come to clean up the main bulk, you'd stand in it, spread it everywhere.
So you're just carrying on, but even when you think you've cleaned it all up?
Yeah.
Why is he called Larry?
Because the head of the system's called Airway Larry. So it's for when medical students are practicing laryngoscopies.
Yeah,
I think
obviously.
that's where the Larry
I'm thinking about, do the medical students not provide enough vomit? I mean...
But they can't do it on command, so, you know.
It needs to be 1, 2, 3, go.
Yeah.
Like that. OK, so now, we can't have Larry actually vomit, you'll be very pleased to know. However...
Come on, Lawrence.
We do have a film of Larry. We're going to have the film without sound, but if any of you lovely people would like to join in and create the sounds that you imagine Larry might make, then help yourselves. Here.
Why, of course.
Yeah, let's have it.
You only had to ask one.
Here we go.
I'm dying. It's coming out of my arse as well. You know when you're being... and you can't turn around quick enough because you know it's going to... Oh, no. Oh, God. Flush me.
Yes, I'm so sorry, darling. The norovirus, presumably, one of the things that you've been looking at, is that right?
Yeah, that's the key thing we're looking at. So it's really infectious, can be infected with 10 viruses, and you can have kind of 1,000 million in a litre of fluid, so highly transmissible.
It's like the Ferrari of the virus world, isn't
Definitely.
it? This is actually the norovirus here, isn't it? I mean, it looks like
yeah.
candied popcorn, but it's actually the norovirus.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for bringing Larry in. Dr. Kat Mackerson Booth. Here's the thing. They found the world's oldest vomit. They found it in Peterborough.
From the back of the Weatherspoon.
Yes. Can I guess how old it is? The oldest...
4,000 years.
A little bit older than that.
Is it a fossil?
It is a fossil, yeah.
Millions of
160
years.
million years. And it was this creature here, an ichthyosaur, so that's an ancient marine reptile. And this is where vomit becomes exciting. This is where it is actually scientifically very exciting.
Best sentence I've ever heard.
I know. We now know that ichthyosaurs behaved much as sperm whales do today. They would eat shellfish whole, and then they would vomit up the indigestible shells because that would otherwise rip their intestines. So we've learnt a huge amount just from that. It's a funny thing, vomit. There's an extraordinary story. Remember Ted Hughes, the poet? There's a story that a woman who met him found him so physically attractive at a party that she had to leave and vomit.
No.
I know.
Is that one of his stories?
Yeah.
She was quite overcome by my attractiveness. She went up there and threw up. Ted, come here.
I had went to a really good party, and on my way home, I was on the tube, and it was on the, you know, those old litter boxes, and I had one of those like, oh, I thought, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming, and everything came out, but there was no bottom on the bin. Filled my shoes.
I love the things the scientists discover. Apparently, they only discover that flu can travel between different species after a ferret sneezed in a scientist's face. 1933. Now, Here's another question to make you queasy. What happened when Michelangelo took his socks off?
Oh, don't say some of his foot came away.
Oh, no.
Apparently he didn't wash, but his skin used to come off if he took his clothes off. So this is thought to be a portrait of him by Raphael. It's a sort of having a go at him. Raphael was a kind of a young buck, and Michelangelo was quite old by then. And he has Michelangelo playing Heraclitus, sort of the weeping, grumpy philosopher, because Michelangelo was incredibly grumpy. But according to Michelangelo's biographer, he wore stockings of dog skin constantly for months together, so that when he took them off, the skin of the leg often came away with them. I know.
He was very busy.
I mean, he was incredibly busy.
How long did the Sistine ceiling take?
Well, it took years and years and years, and he wrote that he constantly had his beard to heaven. He used to talk about the brush is always above my face, my haunches are grinding into my gut, and my poor ass strains to work as a counterweight. Actually, there's a really fascinating thing about Michelangelo that they've fairly recently discovered, that you can probably tell a Michelangelo sculpture. So if you take something like the Rothschild bronzes, there are 3 ways, in fact, the experts now say you can find that it's a Michelangelo. The first thing is that the first and second toes are splayed in the figure. He always depicts the abdomen as not having a 6-pack, but an 8-pack. And he gives his sculptures unruly pubic hair. And the suggestion is that one of his favourite models must have had all of those attributes, the toes and the 8-pack and the unruly pubic hair.
I wouldn't say that's unruly.
Well, it's not had a comb, has it? I like that that's now what we're all looking at.
It was what we were all looking at anyway.
What, the milk tray man's let himself go?
Michelangelo used to get his marble from the Carrara quarries in Tuscany. He used to visit the quarry and pick the exact piece of marble that he wanted.
And David that was discarded. Nobody wanted...
That's absolutely right. In fact, you should have an extra point for that, because it had been discarded by 2 previous artists.
Yes.
Agostino de Duccio and Antonio Rossellino, they both had tried, and the trouble with it is that it's not actually very good marble. And one of the reasons why we know this, there was a guy who was smashed a bit of David's toe off, and they've now been able to analyse the splinters from that. It was a guy called Piero Canata. But you're absolutely right. The David is unfortunately made of not such good stuff. Now, Alan, why might I siphon 4 gallons of gas up your bottom?
How did you get a photograph of that, you swine?
We're talking about hydrogen.
Is it going to have an enema effect? Is it a colon cleanser?
It is a medical thing.
Is it flammable?
It is exactly flammable, and that's why it matters, yeah. This is not exactly...
Whoa. Oh, like, you're actually going to do it?
Yeah. There was an American military surgeon who was called Nicholas Sen, and he came up with a system for checking whether you'd been shot in the guts. So one of the things they would do is they would pump hydrogen up your backside and then set fire to the gas as it escaped from the wound in your stomach. So we're talking about the late 19th century. It was a huge problem for surgeons to work out whether a wounded patient had their intestinal canal pierced by a bullet.
Can't you just put them underwater like an inner tube?
If you did the surgery and it wasn't necessary, it could kill somebody. So they needed to work it out. And so he came up with this system. It was called rectal insufflation of hydrogen gas. It's a bit like a plumber looking for a leak in a gas pipe. If it had gone in, it would escape through the hole. And he did try it.
If there was no hole, they would just explode.
Yes. Well, he did try it on several dogs first, to the point where their intestines ruptured. So, I know. But then he decided to try it on himself, and he had his assistant pump 6 litres of gas up his bottom. Can I just read this, because it's awful? He found that the escape of air or gas from the rectum was prevented by an assistant pressing the margins of the anus firmly above the rectal tube. Tried it on 2 patients, it never really caught on.
It's quite clear that the entire thing was devised because he fancied his assistant.
Also, sometimes I think with these stories about research, I just get to the end of a long day. And I think, let's see what happens if you stick a load of hydrogen up your arm.
But there are lots of self-experimenters. There was a guy called Dr. Stubbins Firth, and he was fascinated by how yellow fever was transmitted. But, I mean, slightly bonkers. He wanted to prove it wasn't contagious. So he did things like he dribbled infected patients' vomit into a cut on himself. He put it into his own eyes, He tried frying the vomit from a yellow fever patient and inhaling the fumes. And then he also sat in a vomit sauna. Who knew there was such a thing?
Wow.
It's another word for a night bus.
Anyway, he didn't catch it, because you can only get it, of course, if it goes straight into the bloodstream, like by a mosquito, which wasn't discovered until 6 decades after he died. He died when he was 36. It doesn't say of what.
Take your pick.
Yeah. And in 2004, there was a biologist called David Pritchard. He allowed 50 hookworm larvae to burrow into his skin, and he wanted to see if the infestation could fight hay fever and asthma. So he applied a dressing. I know, it's horrible. A dressing with pin-size hookworm larvae. They're like sort of maggots on the surface of meat. And he said the itch when they cross through your skin is indescribable. But here is the thing, it worked. That for some reason, the worms somehow seem to switch off the immune system.
Oh, yeah, OK, so he didn't have hay fever, but he had worms inside the arm. That's not better. I had pins and needles. I shot my foot off, so that worked.
Some people go a little bit too far, I think that's enough from the annals of medical history. To that sick puppy that is general ignorance. So tell me, what's the technical name of the first patient in a disease outbreak?
Keith. Oh, the audience will know. What is it? Patient zero.
See, you fell into that trap immediately. No, it's the index case or index patient. People do think that it's patient zero, and actually it's based on a mistake. So the very first time that was given was to a man called Gaetan Dugas, and he was a French-Canadian flight attendant who allegedly contracted HIV in Haiti, and he spread it, allegedly, to lots of men during his lifetime. And he wasn't referred to as patient zero, he was patient O, and the O stood for outside California. But people now think that it was patient zero. While we're on the origins of disease, can you name someone who had Lou Gehrig's disease?
Lou Gehrig.
No, it turns out he may not have had it.
He was a baseball player, wasn't he?
He was a New York Yankees baseball player. He died in 1941, and even though it's named after him, the chances are he didn't have it. It's most likely that he had some kind of brain trauma brought on by the long-term effects.
Very, very tight cap.
Of concussion. So Lou Gehrig's disease is actually motor neurons disease. It's also known as ALS. It's a specific disease which causes the death of neurons controlling voluntary muscles. It became famous actually with the Ice Bucket Challenge. Yeah. They raised £90 million in just 1 month with the Ice Bucket Challenge. Which is cleaner, the gents or the ladies? Yeah.
I mean, I haven't used that enough.
No.
We all agree.
Yeah, that's a very good noise, isn't it? So there was a study at the University of Arizona, and apparently ladies' loos are germier. Why might that be, do you think?
Because we chat in there for quite a long time.
We spend longer in there, but also we take children in.
Oh.
You know, crazy germ carriers.
How are those two floating through the doors?
That is slightly disturbing, isn't it? Women wash their hands a lot more than men. Men less likely to wash their hands at sporting venues. They had a study at Turner Field Baseball Stadium in Atlanta. Men wash their hands just 65% of the time when they're at a sporting venue. I don't know how this works. It says here the study involved researchers discreetly observing.
I would say it's considerably less than 65% of men.
Oh, would you say?
Wash their hands after they've had a wee at the Arsenal. I think there's about 5 of us who use those two. In fact, at the old Wembley Stadium, you go to wash your hands and then usually be about 6 blokes pissing in the sink.
Either of you ladies think that it's worth putting down toilet paper on the seat?
No.
No, why?
No, because you slide off, don't you?
I don't have the time.
Yeah.
Can't go, I'll be out in a minute, have fun with my friends. Don't worry, we'll see the fireworks another time.
Every time I've ever used a public loo, I've always stood there going, what are they doing in there?
That's that.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, it's
sort of
that.
crocheting their own seat.
No, but here's the good news. It's a complete waste of time. The toilet seat is designed to not keep bacteria on it, whereas toilet paper, unbelievably absorbent. The squatting?
Well, I'm more inclined to hover myself.
Yes, so, hovering. Also a bad idea. Well, the pelvic floor muscles can't relax, and so your bladder doesn't fully empty.
It's also a waste of a superpower. What do you think
Apparently, the only way you can get really, really sick in a public lavatory is licking the toilet seat.
Oh.
I'm just saying, that's what they've discovered.
Warm in there.
It turns out that the gentlemen's lavs are cleaner than the ladies', despite the smell. After you've been drawn, hanged and quartered, how many parts do you end up in?
Quartered would suggest, what is it?
Is it 4?
It is 5. Why is it 5?
Do they put your head somewhere else?
Head, yeah, absolutely. So it's your head plus the 4 quarters of your body. What used to happen sometimes is that the various body parts could be spread all over the country. So William Wallace, after his execution, his 4 quarters were sent to Newcastle, Berwick, Perth and Stirling, but his head remained on London Bridge. And there used to be a thing called the Keeper of the Heads. So about 300 years, the London Bridge Gatehouse was home to the Keeper of the Heads, and his job was to display the traitors' heads to good effect, take down the old ones. You know, you're getting that, oh, that one's looking a bit tired, take that one down.
A bit maggoty.
But also, some of them were higher than others. If you had died as a rather senior nobleman, your head on a pole would go higher.
Quite right, that's quite right.
Yes, quite right, the junior one.
I hope you're going to put that at a very high...
Everybody worried about being quartered because then you couldn't have a Christian burial. So under the 1752 Murder Act and the 1832 Anatomy Act, it ruled that criminals could be sentenced to dissection as a punishment, because it meant that you could no longer go to God at the very end.
That's really recent, isn't it, for that? I mean, they're not far off finding penicillin, then.
No, I know. It's about the age of my house. Strange. All of which brings us to the cruel and unusual punishment of the scores. Coming in first with surgical precision. Oh, my goodness, with 8 points. It's Stephen!
Goodness. Thank you so much.
In second place, it's Alan. 7 actual points. And in third place with -5, Victoria. -6, it's Claudia. But Claudia is not last. In last place with -10, it's the audience. Which means I only have to thank Claudia, Stephen, Victoria and Alan, and I leave you with this quirky quotation from George Carlin. Isn't it a bit unnerving that doctors call what they do practice? Thank you and good night.